In the summer of 1984, a deputy sheriff walked out of his small-town station and simply vanished. His patrol car was found abandoned. His badge and gun were missing, but there was no sign of him, no struggle, no witnesses, nothing. Some whispered he had been ambushed. Others believed he betrayed the badge and ran, but his family insisted he would never leave them. For more than 2 decades, the case turned into a ghost story. Rumors spread through bars, backyards, and late-night whispers. Every theory sounded possible, but none brought answers. And then, 21 years later, hikers stepped into a forgotten mine. In the beam of their flashlights, they froze. Against the rock wall sat a skeleton, wearing the tattered remains of a police uniform. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town, but what investigators uncovered next wasn't just heartbreaking. It was something no one in the community was ready to face. So what really happened that night? Did someone send the deputy to his death? Or was it an accident hidden by time? Stay with me, because the truth behind this mystery will leave you stunned. And before we dive in, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and in the comments tell me, where in the world are you watching this from right now? It was June 1984 in a small American town. The sheriff's office was quiet that night. The phones had finally stopped ringing, and paperwork was stacked high on the desks. Deputy Sheriff Michael Harris sat at his desk, finishing a report. He had been on the job for over a decade. People in town trusted him. He was known as steady, calm, and honest. He wasn't the type to stir trouble. At around 9:45 p.m., another officer stopped by his desk. Michael smiled, made a small joke about how the stack of reports never seemed to end, then stood up and stretched. He told the officer he was heading home for the night. Everything about it looked normal. He didn't appear upset. He wasn't rushing. He didn't say anything strange, just a routine end of shift. Michael walked out of the station, got into his patrol car, and drove off into the dark. That moment, him leaving the parking lot, would become the very last time anyone saw him alive. At the time, no one thought much of it. It was just another night. But within hours, his disappearance would grow into one of the darkest mysteries the town had ever faced. Around midnight, a passing driver noticed something strange. A sheriff's patrol car was parked on the edge of a lonely road outside of town. At first, the driver assumed it was a speed trap, but when he glanced inside, the driver's seat was empty. Police were called and officers rushed to check. They quickly realized this wasn't right. The patrol car was locked, parked neatly on the shoulder. The engine was off. Michael's jacket was still inside, but Michael himself was gone. What made it worse, his gun and badge were missing. Those were items he always carried, but there was no blood, no broken glass, no signs of a fight. It was as if he had simply stepped out and vanished. Detectives searched the area with flashlights, expecting to see footprints, tire tracks, or something left behind. But the dirt shoulder was clean. The road was quiet. Nothing suggested what had happened. It wasn't like Michael to leave his vehicle unattended, and it was unthinkable for him to just walk away from his duty. The patrol car sitting alone by the road was the first real clue, and it raised more questions than answers. By 2 a.m., Michael still hadn't come home. His wife, Linda, sat in the living room calling his pager again and again. No response. She kept glancing at the clock. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., then 2. Her children sat upstairs, still awake, peeking out their bedroom windows, waiting for the familiar sight of their father's patrol car pulling into the driveway. It never came. Linda knew something was wrong. Michael was dependable. He never stayed out late without calling. He never ignored her calls. He was a family man who always made sure his kids saw him before bed if he could. By dawn, she couldn't take it anymore. She drove to the sheriff's office and reported that her husband had not returned home. At first, some officers suggested maybe he was tied up with work, but Linda pushed back. This wasn't like him. As word spread through the department, the mood shifted. Officers who had seen him leave the station hours earlier realized they had no idea where he went next. By morning, panic had set in. Michael Harris had disappeared without a trace. By morning, the sheriff's office was buzzing with unease. Deputies had checked every spot Michael usually went after work: his home, his favorite diner, even the gas station where he often stopped. Nothing. At first, some officers tried to stay calm. Maybe he had car trouble. Maybe he went to help someone and forgot to radio in. But deep down, everyone knew Michael was too responsible for that. He followed protocol. He would never just walk off duty. By noon, the worry turned into fear. The abandoned patrol car wasn't normal. His missing gun and badge weren't normal. This looked like something darker. Whispers began to spread through the department. Some said he must have been ambushed. Others wondered if a criminal he once arrested had come back for revenge. A few even whispered the unthinkable, that maybe someone inside the department had turned against him. The sheriff tried to keep order, but it was clear. The deputies were rattled. They had lost one of their own, and no one could explain how. By late afternoon, the word missing was official. Michael Harris had not gone home. He had not checked in. And now, an entire department was bracing for the worst. It didn't take long for news to spread beyond the station. In a small town, secrets don't stay hidden for long. By evening, neighbors were knocking on each other's doors, trading theories. Some were convinced this was payback. Michael had arrested plenty of dangerous people in his years on the force. Maybe one of them, or their friends, had decided to strike back. Others thought it was something even worse. At the local diner, people huddled over coffee, lowering their voices as they spoke. He wouldn't just leave his family, one said. This is foul play. Another whispered, what if someone inside the department knows more than they're saying? Parents kept their children close that night. Doors were locked earlier than usual. A sense of fear spread across the town. If a deputy sheriff could vanish without a trace, then who was safe? Meanwhile, Michael's family watched the news in shock. His wife clutched the phone, waiting for it to ring. His children asked over and over, "Where, Dad?" But there were no answers, only rumors and dread. The town was on edge, and everyone knew whatever happened next would change everything. Before panic completely took over, people began to reflect on the man who had vanished. Michael Harris wasn't just any deputy. He was one of the most trusted in the county. He had served for over 10 years, always steady, always fair. Neighbors described him as the kind of man who never raised his voice unless he had to. On duty, he was tough when the job required it, but also kind. He once bought groceries for a family who couldn't afford food. He regularly checked in on elderly residents who lived alone. At home, he was a family man. He adored his wife, Linda, and was deeply involved in his kids' lives. He never missed a school play or a ball game unless work forced him to. His life seemed solid, stable, and good. So when people whispered about him running away, those who knew him best shook their heads. That wasn't Michael. He wasn't the type to abandon duty or his family. And that made the whole situation harder to accept. If someone like him could vanish without a trace, then this wasn't just strange. This was terrifying. The first 48 hours are always critical in a missing persons case. For Michael Harris, those hours came and went with nothing. No clue, no lead, no sign of where he had gone. Detectives retraced his steps from the night he vanished. He had left the station. He had driven his car to the edge of town. After that, the trail went cold. It was as if the earth had swallowed him. Questions piled up quickly. Was this an ambush? Had criminals targeted him for revenge? Or was it something far more personal? Others raised darker theories. Did Michael have a secret life no one knew about? Was he hiding something? Could he have planned his own disappearance? The family rejected those ideas. His fellow deputies didn't want to believe them either. But without answers, anything felt possible. And by the end of that second day, the case of the missing deputy had shifted from concern to pure mystery. At sunrise, the search began. Deputies gathered in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, maps spread out on car hoods. Orders were short and sharp. Find Deputy Michael Harris. Helicopters lifted into the air, circling above fields and highways. The steady thump of the blades echoed across town. Down below, search dogs were loaded into trucks. Their handlers clipped on leashes. Hopping the dogs could pick up Michael's scent from his patrol car. Deputies knocked on doors across town. Have you seen him? Did you notice anything unusual last night? Most people shook their heads. Some said they heard nothing at all. Others admitted they saw the patrol car earlier but assumed Michael was inside. The town itself felt frozen. People stood in driveways watching the helicopters. Children whispered in school hallways. Even businesses slowed down, customers too distracted, waiting for news. Everyone believed answers would come quickly. How could a deputy sheriff vanish in his own town and not be found? The search was loud, fast, and determined. But with every passing hour, the silence on Michael's radio grew heavier. By the end of the day, there was still no trace. The deputy had vanished into thin air. On the second day, the search widened. Deputies pushed into the thick forests outside of town. Flashlights cut through the trees as teams called out his name. Every crack of a branch made hearts race. Creeks and rivers were checked too. Officers waded in boots along the banks, scanning for anything: clothes, a flashlight, footprints. Divers dropped into cold lakes, combing the dark water with search lines. Each time they surfaced, empty-handed, frustration grew. Back roads became another focus. Patrol cars rolled slowly along dirt tracks, shining spotlights into ditches and abandoned barns. Volunteers joined in with ATVs, scanning areas that cars couldn't reach. Every rustle in the woods felt like a lead. Every splash in the water gave a moment of hope. But again and again, those moments ended with nothing. The search was now consuming the entire county. Hundreds of people joined, but the results were always the same: silence. By the third night, exhaustion was clear. The teams regrouped at the station, muddy and drained. But no one wanted to quit. Somewhere out there, Michael Harris had to be waiting. As the days dragged on, tips poured in. One caller swore they saw a car speeding toward the woods late that night. Deputies rushed out, searching the route. Nothing. Another tip came from a bartender. A stranger had come in, asking questions about the deputy just days before he vanished. Detectives tracked him down. It turned out to be a traveling salesman, completely unrelated. Then came the rumors. Someone claimed Michael had been taken to a hidden hideout deep in the hills. Search teams combed the area for 2 days straight. They found nothing but old hunting cabins. Every lead felt like it could be the breakthrough, but every single one ended in disappointment. Detectives were frustrated. The family was heartbroken, and the town was running out of hope. The missing deputy wasn't just a case anymore. It was becoming a haunting. By the fourth day, the Harris family faced the cameras. The sheriff's office arranged a press conference. Hopping public attention might bring new leads. Linda Harris, Michael's wife, stood at the podium. Her hands shook as she gripped the microphone. Behind her sat their 2 children, both quiet, both looking lost. She tried to stay strong. Her voice cracked as she said, "Michael is a good man. He is a good father. Please, if anyone knows where he is, help us. We just want him home." Reporters leaned forward, capturing every word. The children sat beside her, staring at the floor, too overwhelmed to speak. Their faces told the story better than words could. The fear, the confusion, the heartbreak of not knowing. That night the footage played on every local channel. Viewers across the state saw it. Some felt anger that a lawman could vanish without a trace. Others felt sorrow, watching a family fall apart on live TV. Calls came in after the broadcast, more tips, more theories, but none led anywhere useful. For the Harris family, the press conference was both necessary and crushing. They had shown their pain to the world. And for the first time, many people watching at home began to fear the same thing the family did. This story might not have a happy ending. As the days turned into weeks, the search began to lose its urgency. At first, dozens of volunteers had shown up every morning. They walked fields, searched barns, and knocked on doors. But as time passed, fewer and fewer came back. People had jobs, families, and lives to return to. Hope was fading. For deputies, the workload shifted too. They still followed leads, but regular calls began to pile up. Burglaries, car accidents, domestic disputes. The everyday duties of law enforcement didn't stop, even while one of their own was missing. Slowly, the massive search effort became smaller. Detectives still worked the case, but the energy had changed. It wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a mystery. Linda noticed the change immediately. At home, she watched the news less. Each headline grew shorter, each mention of Michael briefer. Her kids stopped asking when their dad would walk back through the door. They knew now that he wasn't coming home soon. The entire town seemed to sink into silence. The first week had been filled with action and noise, helicopters, search parties, reporters. But by the third week it was different, quiet, empty. Michael Harris had been gone for weeks, and instead of answers, all the town had left was a gnawing fear that he might never be found. As the search dragged on with no results, the whispers began. At first, people only spoke quietly in diners and gas stations. But soon, the questions became louder. How can a deputy vanish and no one knows a thing? One man asked over coffee. Unless maybe someone inside knows more than they're saying. The idea spread quickly. Some locals began to suspect corruption inside the sheriff's department. Maybe Michael Harris had crossed the wrong people. Maybe a case he was working on had turned personal. Or worse, maybe one of his fellow officers had something to hide. Others pushed back. They said Michael was too honest, too dedicated. He wouldn't have gotten involved in anything shady. But those who doubted pointed to the silence. No evidence, no trail, nothing. It doesn't make sense, they repeated. Even darker rumors floated through town. What if Michael wasn't the victim? What if he had secrets? Some wondered if he'd been leading a double life, or hiding money, or running from something none of them knew about. The whispers were painful for the family. Linda refused to believe any of it. But in a small town, once suspicion starts, it spreads like wildfire. By the end of the month, the case had turned cold. The search parties were gone. Helicopters no longer flew overhead. Even reporters stopped calling. What had once been the town's biggest story was now fading into background noise. For Linda and the children, the silence was unbearable. Every night, she still left the porch light on, praying Michael might walk back up the driveway. But with each passing day, that hope dimmed. Neighbors who once promised, "We'll find him," now said less. People avoided eye contact. The unspoken truth was setting in. Michael Harris wasn't coming home. The sheriff's office kept the file open, but momentum was gone. Detectives moved on to other cases, only occasionally circling back when a stray tip came in. And so the town reached a grim acceptance. They didn't know how Michael vanished. They didn't know why, but most believed the same thing: he was gone forever. What remained were only questions, dark, unanswered, and haunting. With no answers, the town began to fill the silence with its own stories. At the diner, people whispered over coffee. Some said Michael Harris had been ambushed. Others insisted it had to be revenge, maybe from a criminal he had locked up. A few went darker, claiming it was betrayal from inside the sheriff's office. Theories spread fast in a small town. One man claimed he saw strange headlights near the woods that night. A woman said she heard voices arguing near the highway. None of it was proven, but the lack of evidence only fueled the talk. Detectives tried to stay focused, but they heard the same rumors everywhere they went. Was Michael lured into a trap? Did he stumble onto something bigger than himself? Or had someone close to him set him up? The family hated the talk. Linda couldn't stand hearing neighbors suggest her husband might have been corrupt, or worse, that he left on purpose. He would never do that, she told reporters, her voice firm. But still, the questions never stopped. As weeks turned into months, the case wasn't just about one missing man. It had become a story people twisted, reshaped, and debated endlessly. And in that vacuum of truth, suspicion became the loudest voice in town. One of the first real suspects came from Michael's own past. Years earlier, he had arrested a violent ex-con named Ray Dillon. Ray had done hard time and never forgave the deputy for it. People remembered Ray shouting in court, swearing he'd get even one day. When Michael vanished, detectives turned to Ray immediately. They tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. Inside the interview room, Ray leaned back in his chair, smirking. He didn't hide his hatred for Michael. "He ruined my life," Ray said, "but I didn't touch him." Detectives pressed him. Where was he the night Michael disappeared? Did he know about the patrol car left at the edge of town? Ray shrugged, giving half answers and sarcasm. But when investigators checked his alibi, it mostly held up. He had been seen at a bar that night, drinking with others. Several people confirmed it. There was no weapon, no evidence, nothing to tie him directly to the disappearance. The sheriff's office wanted Ray to be guilty. He fit the profile too well. But in the end, suspicion wasn't enough. They had to let him go. And just like that, their strongest lead collapsed into dust. After Ray Dillon, attention shifted to a different threat, a biker gang. Michael had helped put several of its members behind bars years earlier. The gang had a reputation for violence. Locals claimed they'd seen bikers hanging around on the outskirts of town in the weeks before Michael vanished. Detectives launched a full investigation. They tracked down members, raided hangouts, and questioned anyone connected. Some officers were convinced this was it, the revenge of a gang with a long memory. But every search ended the same way. No weapons, no evidence, no trace of Michael. The biker angle, like all the others, fizzled. And with each dead end, the mystery of Deputy Michael Harris only grew darker. When months passed with no answers, the whispers turned inward. Some townsfolk started asking a chilling question. What if someone inside the sheriff's department had wanted Michael Harris gone? The idea spread fast. At the grocery store and the church parking lot, people exchanged nervous glances. Who else would know his schedule? Who else would know where he was headed that night? For years, the sheriff's office had been the backbone of the community. But now, rumors split the town. Some residents defended the deputies, saying they were good men and women doing their jobs. Others shook their heads, pointing out that the disappearance had gone unsolved for too long. If they can't solve one of their own missing, a man muttered, maybe they don't want to. Inside the department, the mood grew tense. Deputies who had once worked shoulder to shoulder now eyed each other with doubt. No one said it out loud, but the thought lingered. What if a betrayal had come from within? Linda Harris hated these rumors most of all. To suggest that Michael's brothers in uniform had turned against him felt like a knife in her chest. She refused to believe it. But in a town starving for answers, the idea of inside betrayal was too dark, too tempting to ignore. Just when hope seemed gone, search teams stumbled on something strange. It was found near an old logging road, about 10 miles from where Michael's patrol car had been abandoned. A deputy spotted fabric tangled in the brush. When he pulled it free, his heart stopped. It was a torn piece of police uniform. The patch was frayed, weathered, and dirty, but unmistakable. It matched the type of shirts worn by deputies at the time. For investigators, this was the first real clue. Could it have belonged to Michael Harris? Did it mean he had been dragged through the woods? Or did it point to an ambush site? Excitement surged. Maybe the mystery was finally breaking open. But there was a problem. In 1984, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Forensics couldn't confirm whether the fabric carried Michael's blood, sweat, or even his scent. All they could do was bag it as evidence and hope science would one day catch up. For now, the scrap of uniform was just another puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Detectives kept chasing every thread, but each one fell apart in their hands. The ex-con was questioned again, but nothing new emerged. The biker gang connection fizzled. The whispers about dirty cops went nowhere, just talk, no proof. Even the torn piece of uniform, the strongest clue so far, refused to give up any secrets. Every new rumor sparked a rush of hope, only to crash into the same dead end. A witness said they saw Michael on a highway 2 towns over. It wasn't him. A tip claimed his patrol car had been moved after it was found. False. Another said he was living under a fake name in another state. Nonsense. Weeks stretched into months, and investigators realized they were circling the same ground. Files piled higher, interviews dragged on, but the result was always the same. Nothing solid, nothing useful. The case that once felt urgent now felt cursed. For the Harris family, life became an endless waiting game. Linda tried to stay strong for her children, but nights grew long and empty. She would set Michael's place at the dinner table, then quietly clear it away. The kids asked less and less, but the silence hurt even more than the questions. The town adjusted too. New deputies joined the force, crimes came and went, and the world kept moving. But Michael never stopped haunting it. At ball games, people whispered about him in the stands. At church, they prayed for answers that never came. Late at night, teenagers dared each other to drive past the spot where his patrol car had been found, claiming they could still feel his ghost there. The case became a story without an ending, a shadow that followed everyone. For the family, for the town, and for the sheriff's department, it was a wound that never healed. Time moved forward, but the questions never did. At first, Michael Harris's disappearance was front-page news. Every paper carried his face. Radio hosts repeated his name. Families at dinner tables argued over theories. But slowly, headlines shifted to other crimes, other stories. Weeks became months. Months became years. The urgency faded, but the emptiness stayed. Every patrol car driving through town was a reminder of the deputy who never came home. Every deputy sworn in afterward carried his shadow with them. Kids who were small when he vanished grew up hearing the story as part of local history. Remember the deputy who disappeared became something people whispered in classrooms, at ball games, in church pews. Detectives retired. Some kept the case file in their desk, refusing to let it go. Others admitted quietly they doubted it would ever be solved. For Michael's family, there was no moving on. Holidays felt incomplete. Birthdays came without his smile. The world continued to change around them. New stores, new faces, new problems. But the missing deputy stayed frozen in 1984, never growing older, never coming home. The silence was the loudest reminder of all. Michael's parents carried the heaviest weight. His father, once strong and proud, spent years driving country roads, staring into fields, hopping for any trace of his son. Sometimes he would stop his truck, step into the woods and call Michael's name, as if somehow he might still answer. His mother prayed every night. She kept a candle by the window, refusing to blow it out. Neighbors saw it and understood. It was the sign of a parent who would never give up. But time is cruel. As the years stretched on, both parents grew older. Their health declined. Still, their questions never changed. Where is he? What happened to our boy? In the end, they passed away without knowing. The grief didn't stop there. It spread to the rest of the family. Michael's wife and children had to bury not only their parents, but also the hope that they would ever see Michael found in time for them. The loss of his parents without closure added a second wound. It wasn't just that Michael was gone. It was that his family line carried unanswered pain, leaving a hole that no one could ever fill. Linda Harris refused to leave the home she and Michael had built together. Every room held his presence. His boots stayed by the door. His old jackets hung in the closet. On the mantel above the fireplace sat his badge, carefully polished. Linda dusted it daily, as if keeping it shining might somehow bring him back. She never stopped wearing her wedding ring. But holding on came with a cost. As years went by, whispers circled town. Some said Michael had run away with money. Others said he had been leading a secret life. Linda heard it all, and each rumor cut deep. She knew the man she married, honest, loyal, and proud of his badge. Still, silence fed suspicion. Her nights were the hardest. The bed felt too big, the house too quiet. She raised their children alone, trying to keep Michael's memory alive without letting grief crush them. Some days she told herself he was out there, waiting to come home. Other days she admitted the truth she didn't want to face, that he was gone forever and the answers might never come. Yet through it all she held on. Michael's children never had the chance to grow up in a normal home. At school, they were the kids with the missing father. Friends asked questions they couldn't answer. Do you think he's still alive? Or what if he ran away? Teachers gave them pitying looks, unsure of what to say. Every milestone was marked by absence. Graduations, birthdays, even simple moments like learning to drive, all felt incomplete without him there. Other kids had fathers cheering in the stands or teaching them life lessons. Michael's children had only stories, photographs, and rumors. The whispers in town didn't help. They heard people say maybe their father was corrupt, maybe he abandoned them, maybe he was killed for what he knew. Each rumor was like a scar that never healed. As they grew into adults, the shadow never left. Every decision they made, college, marriage, careers, was shaped by the hole left in 1984. His disappearance wasn't just their father's tragedy. It was a wound carried into the next generation. Even when they tried to live normal lives, Michael's absence followed them everywhere, a curse that time couldn't lift. While the Harris family carried their grief, the town around them changed. New businesses opened, old shops closed, streets were repaved, schools built new classrooms. For newcomers, Michael Harris's name was just something from the past, a mystery told like folklore. But for longtime residents, the story never truly died. In diners, people still leaned close and traded theories over coffee. Some swore he'd been ambushed by criminals he once arrested. Others believed he uncovered something inside the sheriff's office and was silenced. Teenagers passed the story down like a ghost tale. They dared each other to visit the spot where his patrol car had been found, claiming the air felt heavier there. For them, it was thrilling. For the older generation, it was heartbreaking. The sheriff's department carried its own quiet shame. Every new deputy was warned. Don't forget what happened in '84. It was a reminder that danger could strike even in a small town. On the surface, life looked normal. But in the quiet corners, in whispered conversations, the missing deputy was always there, an unsolved mystery woven into the identity of the town itself. For the sheriff's department, Michael Harris's case became more than just another missing persons file. It was a ghost that lived inside the office. Retired officers carried it with them long after they left the force. At reunions or over coffee, the same question always came up. What do you think really happened to him? Some admitted they still dreamed about that night, replaying what they might have missed. Young detectives, fresh out of training, sometimes pulled the old case box off the shelf. Inside were faded photos, interview notes, and stacks of tips. They would spread everything across a table, convinced they could crack what veterans had not. But the deeper they went, the more they realized why the case was still unsolved. Witness statements conflicted. Evidence had gone missing. Leads ended in dead silence. Each time the result was the same. The file went back on the shelf, thicker with dust, heavier with frustration. For the department, the deputy's vanishing wasn't just a cold case. It was a wound that never healed, a reminder of failure that refused to fade. For the family, silence was the cruelest part. Every holiday, every birthday, there was one empty chair. Linda and the children tried to move forward, but the same question haunted every step. Where is he? Neighbors stopped asking. Reporters stopped calling. But inside the Harris home, the question never died. They wondered if he was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. They wondered if he had been hurt or if someone they knew had betrayed him. Sometimes the kids would catch Linda staring at his badge on the mantel. She never said much, but they knew the question was there in her mind too. 2 decades passed, and still the same question circled the family like a shadow. Where is he? It wasn't just grief anymore. It was survival. If they stopped asking, it would mean giving up. And giving up was the one thing they refused to do. In the fall of 2005, a group of hikers decided to explore the hills outside town. The trails led them past an old, abandoned mine shaft. Everyone knew the place was dangerous. Locals said it had been sealed off years earlier, but the boards were broken. The group hesitated at the entrance. The air spilling out was damp and cold. Still, curiosity pushed them forward. They switched on their flashlights, laughing nervously to hide their unease. The beams cut through layers of dust and cobwebs, bouncing off rusted metal and broken beams. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Their laughter faded into whispers. Every footstep echoed back at them. Some wanted to turn around, but others insisted they keep going. It was supposed to be just another adventure, a quick story to tell later. But the mind felt strange, almost heavy, as if something waited deeper inside. The group moved carefully, ducking under collapsed beams, stepping around pools of water. They thought the scariest thing they would face that day was the dark. They had no idea they were walking straight into a discovery that would bring a 21-year mystery back to life. The hikers' flashlights swept across piles of rubble and cracked stone. At first, it was just more of the same: rocks, dirt, old wood. Then one of them froze. "Wait, what's that?" At the far end of the tunnel, something leaned against the wall. It looked like a human figure, sitting slumped, head tilted to the side. The group laughed nervously again. "It's just a mannequin," someone said. Abandoned mines often attracted strange junk, old equipment, trash, even props left behind by pranksters. That had to be it. But as they crept closer, the air grew colder. The shape didn't look like plastic. It didn't shine under the light the way fake materials usually did. Someone stepped forward, raising their flashlight higher. The beam revealed tattered fabric, sleeves, a shirt, a belt around the waist. Their laughter stopped, the silence pressed in, no one moved. Finally, one of the hikers whispered what everyone else was already thinking. "That's not a mannequin." The truth was sinking in. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't fake. They were standing in front of something real, something human. The group inched closer, hearts racing. The flashlight beams shook in their hands. The figure against the wall wasn't alive. It was a skeleton. The bones were yellowed and brittle, resting in a heap but still shaped like a person. The hikers stared in shock. The clothes hanging on the skeleton were old and torn. The fabric had nearly rotted away, but faint outlines remained. On the chest, barely visible, was a patch. One of the hikers stepped closer and wiped dust from the fabric. The patch showed a star, a sheriff's department insignia. Everyone froze. Nearby on the ground, half buried in dirt, was a rusted gun, a cracked leather holster, a pair of boots, decayed but still shaped to feet long gone. The hikers backed away, panicked. They knew they had stumbled onto something far bigger than an abandoned piece of history. This wasn't just a body. This was a deputy sheriff. And suddenly, every unsolved rumor from 1984 came rushing back. After 21 years, the missing man had been found. But the mine had hidden him well, and no one knew yet whether it was an accident or murder. Within hours of the hikers' call, investigators sealed off the mine. Deputies and forensic teams moved in, flashlights slicing through the damp air. The skeleton was carefully documented, every inch photographed before anything was touched. On the ground near the bones lay objects that made everyone's stomach turn. A rusted metal badge, still showing the faint outline of a star. Next to it, a cracked leather holster, eaten away by years of dampness. Inside rested a corroded sidearm, frozen in time. Nearby, half covered in dirt and stone, were boots. The leather was warped, but the shape remained. They weren't just any boots. They were the kind issued to deputies in the 1980s. The room grew quiet. Nobody needed to say it out loud. These weren't random items. They belonged to someone specific. Every piece of evidence pointed in one direction, toward the man who had haunted this town's memory for more than 2 decades. The deputy sheriff who vanished in 1984 was no longer missing. He was here in this mine, surrounded by the very tools of his duty. And now, the world wanted to know how he ended up here. The remains were carefully removed from the mine and taken to a forensic lab. Experts got to work immediately. The bones were fragile but intact. Clothing fragments, the badge, the gun, and the boots were all sealed as evidence. At first, there was no official statement. The sheriff's office didn't want to spark rumors without proof. But inside the lab, the truth was becoming clear. Dental records were pulled. Old x-rays were compared. Piece by piece, the identity locked in. It was him, the missing deputy sheriff. After 21 years, the mystery of his location was finally answered. When the announcement was made, the town froze. News outlets swarmed the story. Families who had whispered about him for years finally had confirmation. He hadn't run away. He hadn't faked his disappearance. He had been here all along, in the dark. The deputy's family, after decades of pain, finally had an answer. But the discovery carried a heavy weight. Finding him was only the beginning. The bigger question remained. How did he end up in that mine? And what really happened on that final night in 1984? The news didn't take long to spread. By the next morning, it was everywhere, on radios, TV, and whispered in every corner of town. For some, the discovery brought tears. People who had grown up with the deputy, who remembered his laugh and his smile, now faced the reality that he was gone for good. Others felt anger. 21 years had passed. How could it take this long to find him? At diners, people sat shaking their heads. In grocery stores, neighbors leaned close, whispering theories. Some said the mine had always been suspicious, that it should have been searched right away. Others wondered if someone in law enforcement had ignored it on purpose. Family friends stopped by the deputy's wife's home, some offering comfort, others just standing silently. It wasn't closure, it was heartbreak all over again. The discovery didn't settle the case. It reopened old wounds. The town wasn't only mourning a man, they were questioning the system that had failed to find him for so long. Once the remains were identified, investigators faced a new question. What exactly had happened? The mine shaft was sealed off with tape and guards. Forensic teams moved carefully, treating it like an active crime scene. Every rock, every scrap of clothing was bagged. Two theories spread quickly. The first was murder. Maybe the deputy had been attacked, his body dumped here by someone who knew the mine would hide the evidence for years. The badge, gun, and uniform seemed too perfect, like a staged scene. But others believed it was an accident. Maybe he had entered the mine on his own, chasing a suspect or following a lead, only to fall and never make it back out. The problem was simple, there wasn't enough proof to decide. No bullet holes, no knife marks, no clear sign of foul play. For the town, that was the hardest part. The deputy had finally been found, but the truth about how he died was still hidden in the dark. Forensic experts carefully lay out the skeleton in a lab. They study each bone, hopping for answers the desert of time never gave. Right away, something jumps out. There are no bullet holes, no stab wounds, no marks that would suggest a fight. That alone is shocking, because for 21 years people believed he had been murdered. Every theory, every rumor pointed to some act of violence. But the bones say otherwise. His ribs show no knife cuts. His skull has no bullet entry. His arms and legs show no defensive injuries, the kind that come from fighting back. This wasn't the body of someone who had been executed. It looked like the body of someone who suffered a single, violent event. Detectives lean over the table, silent, realizing this discovery flips the entire case upside down. For decades they thought about killers, suspects, betrayal. But maybe they had been chasing the wrong story the whole time. The absence of wounds doesn't mean peace, though. It means something else happened. And as they continue, the bones reveal a much darker but far simpler truth. The fractures tell the real story. Forensic specialists point to shattered leg bones, broken ribs, and a crushed pelvis. These aren't the wounds of a fight. They are the result of impact, of hitting something hard from a great height. Slowly the picture becomes clear. The deputy didn't die in a gunfight. He didn't get stabbed or poisoned. He fell. Experts conclude he must have plunged deep inside the mine. Maybe the floor gave way, or maybe he lost his footing in the dark. Either way, the impact was fatal. His skull shows cracks consistent with a fall. His hands are fractured, maybe from trying to grab something on the way down. It wasn't instant. It looks like he hit several ledges before landing at the bottom. For investigators, it's crushing. 21 years of searching, of imagining foul play, all for this. An accident hidden by time and darkness. The deputy likely died alone that night, in silence, with no way for anyone to know where he was. The items found near him tell the final part of the story. His radio is discovered broken into pieces. Forensic techs test it, confirming it never sent a signal. If he tried to call for backup, no one heard. His flashlight is shattered, the lens broken. It explains why the mine swallowed him whole. He may have been left in total darkness after the fall. His belt is twisted, torn from the impact. His holster is bent, sidearm corroded by years underground. Everything shows signs of sudden, violent force. These weren't tools left behind in an organized way. They were wreckage, the scattered remains of a deputy who never stood a chance. Detectives imagine the moment. He falls, slams against the rocks, tries to move. Maybe he reaches for the radio, but it's useless. Maybe he tries the flashlight, but it's broken. Surrounded by silence, hurt too badly to climb out, he is trapped. This isn't a crime scene in the usual sense. It's worse. It's a place where duty met tragedy, where a man doing his job simply vanished because of bad luck and one fatal mistake. Once investigators confirm the deputy likely died from a fall, the next big question rises. Why was he in the mine at all? Detectives pull old reports from 1984. They check every call the sheriff's office got that week. They look for any mention of suspicious activity near the area. Did someone report lights or voices coming from the mine? Was there a rumor of criminals hiding there? Or maybe stolen goods stashed inside? Nothing shows up. His duty logs don't say anything about a mine. His shift notes mention routine patrols, a few traffic stops, and paperwork. Nothing connects him to that abandoned shaft. So investigators are left with two possibilities. One, he chased someone. Maybe he saw movement, maybe a car near the woods. He could have followed on instinct, not knowing the danger ahead. Two, it was random. He could have spotted the entrance by chance and decided to check it out. Deputies often searched odd places, making sure fugitives weren't hiding. Either way, no one knows what drew him in that night. The reason he stepped into that mine, into what became his grave, remains one more unanswered mystery. Then investigators find something that stuns them. They dig through old county records from 1984. Back then, the abandoned shaft wasn't marked on patrol maps. In fact, the paperwork listed the mine as closed and filled in. On paper, it didn't exist. That explains everything. When search teams scoured the area in '84, they had no reason to check the shaft. To them, it wasn't even there. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs sniffed through the woods. Volunteers walked every trail. But no one looked at that hole in the ground, because the official records said it wasn't a hole at all. This detail crushes the family when they hear it. For 21 years, the deputy was lying just a few miles from where the searches happened. All that time, he was in reach. But because of a bad map, no one thought to go inside. Detectives realized the truth is even harder than murder. The deputy's fate was sealed by paperwork, by a mistake that turned a tragic accident into a decades-long mystery. After weeks of testing, interviews, and paperwork, investigators finally settle on the answer. The deputy wasn't murdered. He wasn't ambushed. No one lured him out that night. He fell. The fractures on his bones prove it. The broken radio, shattered flashlight, and twisted belt confirm it. He likely wandered into the mine in the dark, maybe chasing a sound or a figure, maybe just doing his duty. He slipped, tumbled down the shaft, and never got back up. The truth hits the sheriff's department hard. Detectives who once suspected criminals, gangs, or even fellow officers now have to accept the simplest explanation. It was an accident. But simple doesn't mean easy. Telling the family is painful. For more than 2 decades, they imagined kidnappings, betrayals, secret enemies. Now they're told he died alone in the dark, in a place no one thought to look. Detectives admit there's no one to arrest, no crime to solve, just a man who never stopped being a deputy, even in his final moments. It isn't the ending anyone wanted, but it is the truth. For 21 years, his body sat in silence, not hidden by killers, not buried by enemies, but trapped by time itself. In that abandoned mine, his uniform rotted, his badge rusted, his bones slowly settled against the rock. All while above ground, his family begged for answers and a town spun endless theories. The cruelest part is how close he was. Just a few miles from his own home, just a short drive from the station. Searchers walked right past him. They circled overhead. They followed trails nearby. But no one went inside because the maps told them not to. It wasn't murder. It wasn't corruption. It wasn't revenge. It was silence, neglect, and a hole in the ground that no one thought to search. When detectives seal the case, they leave behind one final note. The deputy didn't vanish. He was always there, waiting to be found. The day of the funeral arrives, and the entire town shows up. For years, the deputy's family had no place to mourn, no grave to visit. Now, finally, they do. Police officers from across the state gather, standing shoulder to shoulder in perfect rows. Their uniforms are pressed, their hats lowered. When the hearse arrives, silence falls over the crowd. The casket is draped with the American flag. As it's carried forward, every officer raises their hand in salute. The sound of bagpipes begins to echo, the kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up. His wife walks behind the casket, holding her children's hands. They're not little kids anymore, they're grown adults. But in this moment, they look like children again, broken by the memory of what was lost. At the gravesite, the folded flag is handed to his wife. She holds it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The family finally has a place to say goodbye. But it isn't the goodbye they once prayed for. It's the kind that brings answers, but also reminds everyone of how much was stolen. After the service, reporters gather outside the church. Cameras point toward the family, but no one shouts questions. Everyone waits quietly. The deputy's wife steps forward. For 2 decades, she stood in front of microphones begging for help. Now, for the first time, she can tell the truth. She says they finally know what happened. Her husband didn't abandon his family. He didn't run away. He didn't turn corrupt. He died serving his community, and he never stopped being a deputy, even in his final moments. Her voice cracks as she explains the pain of not knowing for 21 years, the sleepless nights, the whispers in town, the questions from her kids she couldn't answer. Now there's relief, but it comes mixed with grief. Her grown children stand beside her. One of them thanks the investigators who never stopped searching. Another admits the truth is hard to accept, but at least they finally know. The press doesn't push. They simply record the words, understanding the weight. This isn't just closure, it's decades of heartbreak finally given an ending. That evening, the town gathers in the community hall. It feels less like a meeting and more like a family reunion. Old friends of the deputy stand up one by one, sharing stories. They talk about his laugh, the way he never cut corners, the way he helped people who didn't always deserve it. Some remember him pulling them over and giving warnings instead of tickets. Others remember him showing up at their door when times were hard. Younger residents listen quietly. Many of them only knew the legend, the story of the deputy who vanished in 1984, but now they see the man behind the myth. He wasn't a ghost story. He was a father, a husband, and a neighbor. A slideshow plays old photographs. The deputy in uniform, the deputy fishing with his kids, the deputy smiling at town events. For a moment, it feels like he never left. When the night ends, people walk out into the quiet streets carrying something heavy. They know the truth now, but they also know the loss will always stay with them. The deputy is no longer missing, but peace doesn't come easily. For most people, the case feels closed. The deputy was found. The truth was uncovered. But for others, closure doesn't erase the doubt. At the local diner, people whisper the same question over and over. Why wasn't the mine searched in 1984? Search teams combed through rivers, woods, and barns. But the mine, sitting only a few miles away, was left untouched. That decision cost the family 21 years of waiting. Some wonder, if rescuers had gone deeper back then, could the deputy have been saved? Maybe he survived the fall long enough to call out. Maybe he waited in the dark, hoping for help that never came. That thought makes the tragedy even harder to bear. Others take the questions further. Why was he near the mine at all? Did someone lure him there with a false report? Did a call send him to check the shaft, knowing he wouldn't return? The answers are lost to time. What remains are questions that burn. For his family, knowing how he died isn't enough. They need to know why. And that, more than anything else, is the part that keeps them awake at night. Years after the discovery, the case still sits heavy on the minds of investigators. Retired deputies admit they carry regret. They replay the search in their heads over and over. Each time, they stop at the same point. Why didn't we check the mine? One retired detective says he still drives past the site sometimes. He parks, looks out, and thinks about what might have been different. He admits the oversight eats at him. We searched everywhere but there, he says, and that's where he was the whole time. Younger detectives, hearing the story, see it as a lesson. They promise not to repeat the same mistake. Now, when someone disappears, no place is ruled out too quickly. Every hole, every shaft, every abandoned structure is considered. The deputy's case becomes more than a mystery. It becomes a warning, a reminder that even the smallest blind spot can change everything. For the family, these promises don't erase the past, but they do offer a kind of meaning. If his death prevents another case from being forgotten, then maybe his sacrifice wasn't in vain. The legacy of the deputy is no longer just about loss, it's about learning. For the deputy's family, the discovery brought answers but not peace. The pain never really went away. His wife, now older and gray, still sets an extra place at the dinner table sometimes. She says it's habit, but deep down it's because she never stopped missing him. Every holiday is harder than the last. Birthdays come and go, each one marking another year he should have been there. His children, now grown, carry the loss like a shadow. At weddings, at graduations, they feel the empty chair where their father should have sat. Friends cheer, cameras flash, but their eyes always drift to the space that will never be filled. Even with the truth, the years of not knowing left scars. The waiting, the whispers, the endless rumors, those wounds never healed. The family learned to live with the silence, but it changed them. Sometimes they wonder if knowing was even better. The answer brought finality, but it also confirmed their worst fears. He had been alone, trapped in darkness for over 2 decades. The discovery ended the mystery, but it didn't erase the pain. It simply gave it a new shape, a quieter, heavier kind that never goes away. In the end, the story narrows down to a single image. Deep in the abandoned mine, investigators found what time could not erase: a rusted badge and a torn uniform. For 21 years they sat untouched in the dark. The fabric, once crisp, was now shredded and gray. The metal of the badge was eaten away by rust, but the number and department name could still be read. It was proof of who he was and what he gave. That small corner of the mine became a kind of shrine. Officers who saw it said they would never forget. It wasn't just the remains of a man. It was the remains of duty, of sacrifice, of a mystery that haunted a whole town for decades. Some say the image of that uniform, left behind in silence, speaks louder than any words. It tells the story of a man who went to work one night and never came home. A man who gave his life without anyone realizing it until years later. The final picture is haunting. A badge, a gun, a uniform in the dark. A symbol of service, of loss, and of the questions that will never fully be answered.